When Veronica Delacroix posted those intimate photos of my husband thinking I'd break down and beg, she had no idea I'd been quietly documenting their elaborate tax fraud scheme for months, and that her little stunt would give me the perfect excuse to send everything straight to the IRS. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, my phone buzzed with a notification that would change everything. I was lying in my home office in Millbrook Heights, surrounded by financial documents I'd been reviewing for my accounting firm, when an unknown Instagram account tagged me in a post. The username was at truth_teller_2024, but I recognized those manicured nails immediately. Veronica Delacroix, the flashy real estate agent who'd been circling my husband like a vulture for months. The post showed 12 carefully curated photos. My husband Damien sprawled across silk sheets in what I recognized as the penthouse suite at the Grandview Hotel. Veronica's reflection caught in mirrors, her designer jewelry glinting as she documented their affair with the precision of a professional photographer. The caption made my stomach turn. Some women deserve to know the truth about their husband's kiss mark at Claire_Whitmore_CPA, #truth, #reality, #wakeup. But here's what Veronica didn't know. I'm not just any woman. I'm Claire Whitmore, senior partner at Whitmore & Associates, the most respected accounting firm in Millbrook Heights. For the past 6 months, I'd been quietly investigating suspicious financial patterns in my husband's construction company, Ashford Development Group. What started as routine bookkeeping for our joint tax returns had revealed a web of offshore accounts, falsified invoices, and cash transactions that made my forensic accounting instincts scream. I stared at those photos, waiting for the tears to come, waiting for my heart to shatter. Instead, I felt something cold and calculating settle in my chest. Because there, in photo number 7, was Damien's laptop screen clearly visible in the background. And on that screen was a document I recognized, the fake invoice from Meridian Steelworks that had been bothering me for weeks. The same invoice that claimed $847,000 in materials for a project that had only used $340,000 worth of actual steel. Veronica thought she was destroying me with proof of infidelity. What she'd actually done was hand me photographic evidence of active tax fraud. I screenshot every image before she could delete them, then opened my encrypted files. For months, I'd been building a case almost by accident. It started when I noticed irregularities in our joint business account. Damien's company had been reporting dramatically different numbers to different agencies. The IRS saw one set of books, showing minimal profits and maximum deductions. His investors saw another set, showing explosive growth and huge margins. The state tax authority saw a third version, claiming various local tax credits that didn't match his actual activities. As a forensic accountant, I've testified in dozens of tax fraud cases. I know exactly what criminal tax evasion looks like, and my husband was practically writing a textbook on it. But the real revelation came when I started tracking Veronica's involvement. She wasn't just sleeping with my husband, she was his money laundering partner. Her real estate company, Delacroix Properties, had been purchasing distressed properties with Damien's illegal profits, then flipping them through a network of shell companies. The profits were flowing through offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, then being reinvested in legitimate businesses to clean the money. Veronica thought she was flaunting their affair. What she'd actually done was confirm that both of them were at that hotel on March 15th. The same night, $280,000 in untraceable cash was transferred through one of their shell companies. I had the bank records, the timestamps, and now, thanks to her Instagram post, I had proof they were together coordinating their illegal activities. I picked up my phone and opened my contacts. My finger hovered over Special Agent Diana Rodriguez at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Diana and I had worked together on several high-profile cases. She'd been trying to crack a money laundering ring operating through luxury real estate in our area for 2 years. But I didn't call her, not yet. Instead, I opened my laptop and began typing. If Veronica wanted to play games on social media, I could play too. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I composed a detailed report documenting every suspicious transaction, every fake invoice, every offshore account transfer. I had bank statements showing unreported income totaling $2.3 million over 3 years. I had invoices for phantom employees who didn't exist. I had property records showing purchases made with laundered money. Most importantly, I had Veronica's Instagram post proving they were together when several of these crimes occurred. As dawn broke over Millbrook Heights, I saved my 47-page report to an encrypted drive. Let Veronica think she'd won with her little photo stunt. Let her believe she'd broken me, that I'd crumble into tears and beg Damien to choose me. She had no idea that while she was posing for selfies, I'd been building a federal case that would send both of them to prison for 10 to 15 years each. The irony was perfect. Veronica thought she was exposing Damien's infidelity to hurt me. Instead, she documented evidence of ongoing criminal conspiracy that would expose their entire operation to the IRS, the FBI, and every financial crime task force in the tri-state area. I made myself a cup of coffee and watched the sunrise paint the sky pink over our mansion, the mansion that, according to my calculations, had been purchased with approximately $400,000 in untaxed income. By this time tomorrow, it would likely be seized as proceeds of criminal activity. Veronica wanted me to cry over her photos. Instead, I was about to make her and my husband very, very sorry they'd ever decided to commit federal crimes while documenting their stupidity on social media. The hunt was about to begin. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next 48 hours became the most methodical investigation of my career. While Damien slept off his hangover in the guest bedroom, completely unaware that his world was about to implode, I transformed our home office into a forensic accounting war room. I started by downloading every single one of Veronica's Instagram photos in their original resolution. What she'd intended as weapons of emotional destruction became exhibits A through L in a federal tax evasion case. Photo number 7 alone was worth its weight in gold. That laptop screen showing the Meridian Steelworks invoice wasn't just evidence of their affair, it was proof of active document falsification. But I needed more than Instagram posts to destroy them completely. At 6 a.m., I called my assistant Natalie Pembroke at the office. Nat, I need you to pull every file we have on Ashford Development Group from the past 3 years. Quietly, don't mention it to anyone else. Everything okay, Claire? Natalie's voice carried that concerned tone she used when she knew I was working on something big. Just some irregularities I need to review. Can you have the files ready by 9? Already pulling them. I've been wondering when you'd ask. Some of those transactions looked creative. That's why I loved Natalie. 23 years as a paralegal before joining my firm, she could spot financial fraud from a mile away. If she'd noticed the irregularities too, my suspicions were definitely justified. Next, I contacted my friend Jessica Chen, no relation to the name you told me to avoid, who worked as a digital forensics expert for the State Attorney General's office. Jessica owed me a favor from when I'd helped prove her ex-husband was hiding assets during their divorce. Jess, I need a personal favor. Can you run a discreet trace on some financial transactions? Off the books, just between friends. How off the books are we talking? The kind where you accidentally stumble across evidence of money laundering while doing completely unrelated research. Jessica laughed. Oh, that kind of accident. Send me what you have. Within an hour, I'd encrypted and sent her the suspicious bank transfers, shell company registrations, and property records I'd been collecting. Jessica had access to databases I couldn't touch as a private accountant, and her accidental discoveries would be admissible in court, if they happened to find their way to the right law enforcement agencies. While I waited for Jessica's response, I focused on Veronica's real estate empire. Her company, Delacroix Properties, had been suspiciously successful for someone who'd only gotten her license 3 years ago. I pulled public records on every property transaction she'd been involved with, cross-referencing them with Damien's project timelines and cash flow statements. The pattern was beautiful in its stupidity. Every time Damien's company received a large cash payment, usually from clients who preferred to pay in untraceable bills, Veronica would purchase a distressed property within weeks. She'd then hire Ashford Development Group to renovate the properties, paying Damien inflated amounts that helped legitimize his illegal cash. The renovated properties would sell for massive profits, which were then invested in legitimate businesses or transferred to offshore accounts. They'd created a perfect money laundering cycle, using real estate as their washing machine. By noon, I had documented 17 properties involved in their scheme, representing approximately $3.2 million in laundered money. Each transaction violated multiple federal laws: tax evasion, money laundering, bank fraud, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Holy shit, Claire. Your husband and his girlfriend aren't just cheating on taxes. They're running a full-scale, organized crime operation. Call me." I stepped onto our back patio, making sure Damien was still passed out upstairs, before calling Jessica back. "Tell me you're somewhere private," Jessica said immediately. "Home office, doors locked. What did you find?" Your instincts were right. These aren't just tax violations. This is RICO territory. I found connections to at least 12 shell companies, 8 offshore accounts, and here's the kicker. They're using cryptocurrency to move money through 3 different countries before it comes back as investment income. My blood ran cold. RICO meant Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Prison sentences of 20 years or more. Asset forfeiture of everything they'd ever touched. "There's more," Jessica continued. "Veronica's real estate license? She lied on her application about previous criminal history. Turns out she was arrested for check fraud in Nevada 7 years ago, but the charges were dropped. If she lied on a federal licensing application while running a money laundering scheme, that's perjury and fraud on top of everything else." Exactly. Claire, these people are looking at decades in federal prison, but here's what really concerns me. Some of these transactions are recent, like within the last 30 days recent. They're still actively committing crimes. I felt a chill run down my spine. If they were still operating, that meant more evidence was being created every day. It also meant I was potentially in danger if they discovered what I knew. "Jessica, I need you to document everything you found and create a secure backup. If something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you, but yes, I'm already creating redundant files. Claire, you need to contact the FBI and IRS immediately. This is too big for you to handle alone." After hanging up with Jessica, I sat in my office staring at the wall of evidence I'd assembled. Financial statements, bank records, property deeds, cryptocurrency transaction logs, and 12 high-resolution photos of my husband and his criminal partner documenting their crimes, while they thought they were just rubbing their affair in my face. Damien had always underestimated me. He saw me as the quiet accountant wife who balanced the books and asked no questions. He had no idea that forensic accounting was essentially detective work with spreadsheets. And I was very, very good at my job. Around 2 p.m., I heard movement upstairs. Damien was finally awake, probably nursing a hangover, and wondering why his phone had so many missed calls and angry messages from people who'd seen Veronica's Instagram post. I quickly secured all my evidence files in encrypted folders and activated the hidden camera system I'd installed in the house the previous month. If Damien or Veronica tried anything stupid, I'd have video evidence of that too. As I heard his footsteps on the stairs, I opened a completely innocent client file on my computer screen and pretended to work on routine tax preparations. Let him think his secret was safe. Let him believe Veronica's little photo stunt had worked exactly as planned. He had no idea that instead of crying over his betrayal, I'd spent the morning building a federal case that would send both of them to prison for the rest of their productive lives. The hunter had finished setting her traps. Now it was time to wait for the prey to walk into them. Damien stumbled into the kitchen looking like death warmed over, his expensive silk pajamas wrinkled and his hair sticking up at odd angles. The smell of whiskey and guilt hung around him like a toxic cloud. He'd clearly seen Veronica's Instagram post based on the way he kept glancing at his phone with barely concealed panic. "Morning, honey," I said sweetly, not looking up from my laptop where I was pretending to review quarterly tax reports. "You were out late last night. Another client dinner?" His jaw tightened. "Yeah, the Henderson project ran over. You know how these investors can be." The Henderson project that had been completed 6 months ago. The same project where he'd inflated material costs by 340% and pocketed the difference through fake vendor invoices. I'd found the real receipts buried in his filing cabinet the week before. "Of course," I replied, my voice dripping with false understanding. "I'm sure Mrs. Henderson kept you very busy discussing construction details." Damien's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his face went pale. Probably another message from someone who'd seen the photos. His mother, his business partner, or maybe one of his golf buddies, asking awkward questions about his midnight business meetings. That's when Veronica Delacroix decided to make her grand entrance. She waltzed through our front door without knocking, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor like gunshots. She was dressed to kill in a white power suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, paid for, no doubt, with laundered money from their real estate scheme. "Damien, darling," she purred, completely ignoring my presence. "We need to talk about damage control. Your wife's little Instagram meltdown last night has people asking questions." I looked up from my laptop with genuine confusion. "I'm sorry, what Instagram meltdown?" Veronica's perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up. She clearly expected to find me sobbing into a box of tissues, not calmly working on tax returns in my silk robe. "Oh, you haven't seen?" She pulled out her phone with theatrical flair. "Honey, I posted some photos last night. I thought you deserved to know the truth about your husband's extracurricular activities." She showed me her phone screen, clearly expecting waterworks. Instead, I studied the images with the same clinical detachment I used when reviewing financial statements. "Interesting," I said, zooming in on photo number 7. "Is that a Meridian Steelworks invoice on Damien's laptop? I've been trying to track down discrepancies in their billing for weeks." Veronica's confident smirk faltered. This wasn't going according to her script. "That's not, the point isn't the paperwork, Claire. The point is that your husband has been cheating on you with me for 8 months. 8 months? I tilted my head thoughtfully. That's fascinating timing. Damien, didn't the Riverside Commons project start around then? The one where you claimed $400,000 in steel costs, but I could only find receipts for $150,000? Damien's face had gone from pale to green. "Claire, what are you talking about?" "Oh, just some bookkeeping irregularities I've been investigating. Nothing major," I smiled at Veronica. "Although I have to ask, where exactly did you get the money for that beautiful Cartier bracelet? The one you're wearing in photo number 3? Veronica instinctively touched her wrist, her confidence cracking. That was a gift." "From Damien? How sweet. Though I'm curious how he afforded a $47,000 bracelet on his declared income of $180,000 last year, especially after taxes." The silence in the room was deafening. Damien looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Veronica's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the fear creeping into her eyes. I stood up slowly, closing my laptop with deliberate precision. "You know what, Veronica? I actually want to thank you for posting those photos." "You? What?" Those pictures are incredibly helpful for my investigation, especially the timestamps showing you and Damien together on March 15th. That's the same night someone transferred $280,000 through Delacroix Properties' escrow account. What an amazing coincidence. Veronica's face went white. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. Just like you don't know about the shell company in Delaware that purchased the Oakwood District properties, or the Cayman Islands account that received the profits from those sales, or the cryptocurrency transfers that brought the money back as, quote, investment income. I walked over to my briefcase and pulled out a thick folder, setting it on the kitchen counter with a satisfying thud. Damien, honey, I need you to explain something to me. According to your tax returns, Ashford Development Group made $340,000 in profit last year. But according to your investor reports, you made $1.2 million. And according to your bank statements, you actually received $2.8 million in various payments. Claire, I can explain. Oh, I'm sure you can. I'm particularly interested in your explanation for the Pemberton Avenue flip. You know, the one where Veronica bought a condemned property for $75,000, hired your company to renovate it for $200,000, then sold it for $450,000 3 months later. Quite the profit margin. Veronica tried to regain her composure. That was a legitimate business transaction. I have all the proper documentation. I'm sure you do, including the fake invoices from your non-existent subcontractors. And the receipts for the phantom materials that were never delivered? Very thorough documentation. I opened the folder and spread several documents across the counter. Bank statements, property records, invoices, and financial reports created a paper trail of corruption that would make a federal prosecutor weep with joy. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady and professional. You two are going to sit down and explain to me, in detail, every illegal transaction you've conducted over the past 3 years. Every fake invoice, every unreported payment, every penny that should have been reported to the IRS. You can't prove anything, Damien sputtered, but his voice lacked conviction. I pulled out my phone and opened my photo gallery, showing them screenshots of their own incriminating Instagram posts alongside bank transfer records. Actually, I can prove everything, down to the minute, including the fact that you two were together when several of these transactions occurred, which makes this a criminal conspiracy under federal law. Veronica's legs seemed to give out. She sank into one of our kitchen chairs, her designer composure finally cracking completely. What do you want? She whispered. Right now, I want honesty, complete transparency about your entire operation. Because here's the thing. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division takes tax evasion very seriously, especially when it involves money laundering, bank fraud, and conspiracy. I sat down across from them, pulling out a legal pad and pen. So let's start from the beginning. When did you two decide to become federal criminals? And please, don't insult my intelligence by claiming this was all innocent business dealings. I'm a forensic accountant, not an idiot. Damien and Veronica exchanged panicked glances. The predator had become the prey, and they were finally beginning to understand the magnitude of their situation. The woman they tried to destroy with photos of their affair had just revealed she'd been building a federal case against them for months. Their attempt at emotional manipulation had backfired spectacularly, providing her with additional evidence of their crimes. Now they sat in my kitchen, surrounded by proof of their illegal activities, realizing that their biggest mistake wasn't getting caught cheating. It was underestimating the quiet accountant they thought they could break with a few Instagram photos. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and we were just getting started. 20 minutes into their stammering confessions, my doorbell rang. Perfect timing. That'll be my business partner, I announced, standing up from the kitchen table where Damien and Veronica sat looking like defendants at their own trial. I asked him to join us for this conversation. Veronica's eyes widened in panic. You can't involve other people in this. Actually, I can involve whoever I want in my own home, I replied smoothly, walking toward the front door. Especially when discussing financial crimes that affect my accounting firm's reputation. I opened the door to find Marcus Reynolds, my business partner and co-founder of Whitmore & Associates. Marcus was a former FBI financial crimes investigator who'd left federal service to start our firm 5 years ago. His silver hair and sharp suits made him look distinguished, but his real value was his encyclopedic knowledge of federal financial crime statutes. "Morning, Claire," Marcus said, his voice carrying that authoritative tone that made guilty people confess things unprompted. "I brought the files you requested." He carried a large briefcase and wore the expression of someone who'd seen enough financial criminals to spot them from across a room. When Marcus walked into our kitchen and saw Damien and Veronica huddled together at the table, his experienced eyes immediately assessed the situation. "Mr. Ashford," Marcus nodded at my husband. "Ms. Delacroix, I understand we have some tax irregularities to discuss." Veronica shot to her feet. "We don't have to talk to anyone. This is harassment." Marcus set his briefcase on the counter and opened it with practiced efficiency. "Actually, Ms. Delacroix, financial crimes involving interstate commerce and federal tax law fall under several jurisdictions. But you're absolutely right. You don't have to talk to us." He pulled out a thick manila folder and set it beside my evidence stack. "You can speak directly to Special Agent Rodriguez at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, or Agent Thompson from the FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force, or Detective Williams from the state's Organized Crime Unit." Marcus smiled coldly. "I have all their direct numbers if you'd prefer." The color drained from Damien's face. "Marcus, this is between Claire and me. It's a personal matter." "Actually, Damien, tax evasion stopped being personal the moment you decided to defraud the federal government," Marcus replied. "Claire asked me to review your company's financial records from a professional standpoint. What I found was concerning." He opened his folder and began laying out documents with the precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence. "Ashford Development Group has reported an average annual income of $400,000 over the past 3 years. However, your actual cash flow suggests income of approximately $2.8 million annually. That's a discrepancy of $7.2 million in unreported income." Veronica sank back into her chair, her designer confidence completely shattered. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, "your company has claimed $1.4 million in fraudulent business deductions, phantom employees, non-existent equipment purchases, and fabricated material costs. Each false deduction is a separate felony under federal tax law." He turned his attention to Veronica, who was now gripping the edge of the table with white knuckles. "Ms. Delacroix, your real estate activities show similar patterns. Delacroix Properties has been involved in 17 property transactions over 3 years, with a combined value of $4.2 million. However, the source of your initial investment capital is unclear." "I inherited money from my grandmother," Veronica whispered. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Your grandmother, Ethel Delacroix, died in 2019 with $12,000 in assets and $8,000 in debts. Her estate was settled through probate court in Nevada. Public records show you inherited nothing." The silence that followed was deafening. Veronica looked like she might be sick. "Here's what actually happened," Marcus continued, his voice taking on the rhythmic cadence of someone who delivered this speech many times before. "Mr. Ashford's construction company received payments in cash from clients who preferred to avoid taxes themselves. Instead of reporting this income, he conspired with Ms. Delacroix to launder the money through real estate transactions." He pulled out a timeline chart that looked like something from a federal courtroom. March 2021, Ashford Development receives $280,000 cash payment from Riverside Development Group. Within 2 weeks, Delacroix Properties purchases the Elmwood Avenue property for $275,000 cash. April 2021, Ashford Development receives $340,000 cash payment from Metropolitan Builders. Within 10 days, Delacroix Properties purchases the Oak Street duplex for $335,000 cash. May 2021, Ashford Development receives $190,000 cash payment from Pinnacle Construction. Within 1 week, Delacroix Properties purchases the Maple Drive lot for $185,000 cash. The pattern continued for 3 full pages. Every major cash payment to Damien's company was followed immediately by a corresponding property purchase through Veronica's real estate company. The properties were then renovated using Ashford Development Group as the contractor, allowing Mr. Ashford to legitimize additional unreported income through inflated renovation costs. The properties were sold at substantial profits, which were then transferred through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. Marcus looked up from his documents. This isn't just tax evasion. This is money laundering, bank fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. Under federal sentencing guidelines, you're both looking at 15 to 20 years in prison. Damien finally found his voice. What do you want from us? Nothing, I said, standing up and walking to the window. This isn't about what we want. This is about what the law requires. I turned back to face them, my expression calm and professional. Marcus, show them the rest. My business partner reached into his briefcase and pulled out another folder, this one marked with red tabs. We've already filed preliminary suspicious activity reports with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, Marcus announced. Your banking patterns triggered multiple automated alerts for potential money laundering. Veronica's phone started buzzing incessantly. She glanced at it and her face went ashen. That's probably your bank, I observed. Suspicious activity reports tend to prompt immediate account reviews. Don't be surprised if your assets are frozen pending investigation. Sure enough, Veronica answered her phone to find her banker, asking urgent questions about recent large cash deposits and wire transfers. Her voice shook as she tried to provide explanations that sounded increasingly desperate. While she stammered through her call, Marcus continued his methodical destruction of their criminal enterprise. We've also identified connections to at least 12 shell companies, 8 offshore accounts in 3 countries, and cryptocurrency transactions designed to obscure the source of funds. The total amount of money involved exceeds $5 million over 3 years. He closed his folder with finality. Gentlemen and ladies, we're not talking about simple tax mistakes. This is organized financial crime at a federal level. The kind that destroys lives, ruins careers, and sends people to prison for decades. Damien looked at me with a mixture of desperation and disbelief. Claire, we can work this out. We can pay the back taxes. Make this right. You can't make right 3 years of deliberate criminal activity, Marcus interjected. The IRS doesn't negotiate with money launderers. I sat back down at the table, pulling out my phone. Here's what's going to happen, I said calmly. In approximately 30 minutes, Special Agent Rodriguez from the IRS will arrive to conduct formal interviews. She'll be accompanied by FBI agents and state investigators. Both Damien and Veronica started speaking at once, their voices overlapping in panic. You can cooperate fully and hope for reduced sentences, I continued, or you can continue lying and face the maximum penalties for every charge. I stood up and looked at my husband, this man who'd betrayed me, stolen from the government, and thought he could destroy me with Instagram photos. The choice is yours, but either way, your criminal enterprise ends today. Exactly 23 minutes after Marcus announced the federal agents were coming, Damien's phone exploded with incoming calls. His business partner, his lawyer, his accountant, and most importantly, his father, retired Judge Harrison Ashford, the man who'd spent 40 years building political connections throughout the state. I have to take this, Damien said, his voice shaking as he answered his father's call. Dad, thank God, Claire's lost her mind. She's making up stories about tax evasion and... Even from across the kitchen, I could hear Judge Ashford's booming voice through the phone speaker. "Shut up, Damien. Don't say another word. I'm sending my attorney immediately. Do not speak to anyone until he arrives." Within minutes, our quiet suburban morning transformed into chaos. First came Theodore Blackstone III, the most expensive criminal defense attorney in the state, arriving in a gleaming black Mercedes, with 2 junior associates carrying briefcases that probably cost more than most people's cars. Then came Judge Ashford himself, his silver Bentley pulling into our driveway like he owned the neighborhood. At 73, Harrison Ashford still commanded respect through pure intimidation. His connections reached into every level of state government, and he'd never lost a battle he considered worth fighting. "Claire," Judge Ashford said, sweeping into our kitchen like he was entering his own courtroom, "I think there's been a significant misunderstanding here." Marcus and I exchanged glances. We'd both dealt with corrupt officials before, and the judge's arrival meant our investigation was about to get much more complicated. Theodore Blackstone immediately took control of the situation with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd defended wealthy criminals for 30 years. "Ms. Whitmore, I understand you have concerns about certain financial irregularities," Blackstone said, his voice carrying the condescending tone lawyers used when they thought they were dealing with amateurs. "However, I must advise you that making false accusations about tax evasion is itself a federal crime." "Interesting," Marcus replied dryly. "Are you suggesting that bank records, property deeds, and financial statements constitute false accusations?" "I'm suggesting that misinterpreting legitimate business transactions could be considered defamation, harassment, and potentially extortion." Judge Ashford stepped forward, his imposing presence filling the room. "Claire, my son may have made some personal mistakes, but destroying his reputation with wild conspiracy theories won't solve your marriage problems." "Personal mistakes?" I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "Harrison, your son has been running a money laundering operation through real estate transactions for 3 years. This isn't about our marriage. This is about federal crimes." "Alleged crimes," Blackstone corrected quickly, "without proper forensic accounting audits conducted through official channels. These documents prove nothing." That's when Marcus smiled, the cold, predatory smile he used to wear when federal defendants thought they could outsmart the FBI. "Actually, Mr. Blackstone, we conducted full forensic audits last week, through very official channels." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a document with federal letterhead that made everyone in the room freeze. "This is a preliminary report from the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Your clients triggered 17 separate automated alerts for suspicious financial activity over the past 6 months." Judge Ashford's face went pale, but his voice remained steady. "You had no right to involve federal agencies in a private domestic dispute. We had every right to report suspected money laundering when we identified it during routine accounting services," I replied. "It's actually a legal requirement under the Bank Secrecy Act." Veronica, who'd been silently panicking in the corner, suddenly found her voice. "This is all Damien's fault. I was just buying and selling properties. I didn't know he was using me to launder money." Both lawyers turned to stare at her with expressions of pure horror. The first rule of criminal defense is never let your client speak without preparation, and Veronica had just violated that rule spectacularly. "Shut up," Blackstone snapped. "Don't say another word." But the damage was done. Veronica had just admitted knowledge of the money laundering scheme while trying to distance herself from it. Judge Ashford's political instincts kicked in immediately. "Theodore, I think we need to reassess our approach here." That's when I realized the judge wasn't just trying to protect his son, he was protecting himself. A federal investigation into Damien's business would inevitably reveal the source of some of that laundered money, and I suspected it might trace back to some very interesting political contributions and judicial favors. "Marcus," I said quietly, "show them the Pinnacle construction contracts." My business partner opened another folder, revealing documents that made Judge Ashford's composure crack for the first time. Pinnacle Construction received several no-bid government contracts over the past 3 years, Marcus explained. Contracts that were awarded through a process overseen by Judge Ashford's former colleagues on the County Development Board. Those contracts were awarded through proper legal channels, the judge said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. I'm sure they were. It's interesting, though, that Pinnacle Construction consistently overcharged the county by 200 to 300%, then paid the excess to Ashford Development Group as, quote, consulting fees that were never reported to the IRS. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just money laundering, it was government corruption, bid rigging, and conspiracy to defraud taxpayers. Theodore Blackstone was frantically scribbling notes, clearly realizing his clients were involved in something far more serious than simple tax evasion. Furthermore, Marcus continued, Judge Ashford personally recommended Pinnacle Construction for several of these contracts. Contracts worth a combined $2.3 million, with approximately $800,000 in overpayments that ended up in Damien's accounts. Judge Ashford's legendary composure finally shattered. You can't prove any connection between those contracts and my son's business activities. Actually, we can, I said, pulling out my phone. Veronica was kind enough to document several meetings between you, Damien, and Pinnacle Construction's owner at the Grandview Hotel. The same hotel where she posted those Instagram photos. I showed them screenshots of Veronica's social media posts from 6 months ago, photos she'd intended as innocent documentation of her glamorous lifestyle, but which clearly showed Judge Ashford shaking hands with known government contractors while Damien looked on. You photographed everything, I continued. Your dinners, your meetings, your celebrations after each successful contract award. You created a complete photographic timeline of government corruption. Veronica looked like she might faint. Her Instagram addiction had just documented a federal conspiracy. Blackstone closed his notepad with a sharp snap. I need to speak with my clients privately. Immediately. Of course, I replied. You have about 7 minutes before Special Agent Rodriguez arrives with her team. Judge Ashford's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID, and his face went ashen. That's probably the state attorney general's office, Marcus observed. News travels fast in law enforcement circles, especially when sitting judges are potentially involved in corruption cases. As Judge Ashford reluctantly answered his phone, I could hear the stern voice of someone asking very pointed questions about his connection to Pinnacle Construction and the County Development Board. Damien slumped in his chair, finally understanding the magnitude of what was unfolding. His affair with Veronica hadn't just exposed his tax evasion, it had revealed a corruption scheme that reached into the highest levels of state government. Claire, he whispered, what do you want? What will it take to make this go away? I looked at my husband, this man who'd betrayed me personally and professionally, who'd thought he could destroy me with Instagram photos while running criminal enterprises behind my back. Damien, I said softly, some things can't be made to go away. You chose to commit federal crimes. You chose to involve your father in government corruption. You chose to document everything on social media. The sound of car doors slamming outside announced the arrival of Special Agent Rodriguez and her team. The only choice you have now is how much you cooperate with the investigation. Special Agent Diana Rodriguez arrived with a team that looked like they were prepared for war. 3 black SUVs pulled into our driveway, followed by unmarked sedans carrying agents from the FBI Financial Crimes Task Force and the state's Organized Crime Unit. Diana herself strode up our front walkway with the confidence of someone who'd taken down multi-million-dollar criminal enterprises before breakfast. Claire, she said, greeting me with a brief nod as I opened the front door, I got your call about the additional evidence. This situation has escalated significantly since our conversation yesterday. I'd called Diana less than 24 hours after Veronica's Instagram stunt, but I'd made it seem like a routine consultation about suspicious financial patterns I'd discovered during my normal accounting work. Diana had no idea I'd been planning this moment for weeks. "Agent Rodriguez," I replied formally, very aware that every word was being recorded and would eventually be used in federal court. "Thank you for responding so quickly. The situation has indeed become more complex." Theodore Blackstone immediately stepped forward, his expensive suit and practiced arrogance on full display. "Agent Rodriguez, I'm representing Mr. Ashford and Ms. Delacroix. I must protest this harassment of my clients based on unsubstantiated allegations from a disgruntled spouse." Diana's smile was colder than a Minnesota winter. "Mr. Blackstone, we're not here based on allegations from anyone's spouse. We're here because the Treasury Department flagged $5.2 million in suspicious financial activity involving your clients' businesses." She gestured to one of her agents, who began setting up recording equipment on our dining room table. "Furthermore," Diana continued, "we have evidence of potential government corruption involving county contracts, which falls under federal jurisdiction regardless of any domestic situations." Judge Ashford tried to reassert his authority. "Agent Rodriguez, I think there's been a significant misunderstanding. I'm retired Judge Harrison Ashford, and I can assure you—" "Judge Ashford," Diana interrupted, "I'm very aware of who you are. The State Attorney General's office contacted us this morning about irregularities in county development contracts awarded during your tenure on the Oversight Board." The judge's face went pale. His political connections, which had protected him for decades, were suddenly working against him. That's when I played my masterstroke. "Agent Rodriguez," I said, pulling out a manila envelope I'd prepared the night before, "I think you should see this before you begin your interviews." Inside the envelope were copies of documents I'd been collecting for months, but not the financial records everyone expected. These were personal communications that revealed the true scope of their criminal conspiracy. "These are text message records from Veronica's phone," I announced, spreading the printed conversations across our dining room table. She backed up her phone to a cloud service that Damien pays for. "Since we're still legally married, I have access to all our shared accounts." Veronica gasped. "You went through my phone?" "I went through my husband's cloud storage account, which happened to contain your backed-up messages," I corrected. "It's all perfectly legal." The text messages were damning beyond belief. Conversations between Veronica and Damien, discussing specific amounts of cash to be laundered, which properties to purchase, and how to structure transactions to avoid detection. But the most devastating messages were between Veronica and Judge Ashford. Diana picked up one printout and read aloud. "Message from Harrison Ashford to Veronica Delacroix, dated March 10th. Pinnacle contract approved. $340,000 overage as discussed. D should receive payment by Friday. Celebrate quietly." The silence in the room was deafening. "Message from Veronica to Harrison Ashford, March 15th. Oak Street property purchased. Clean transaction. D's payment processed through renovation account. No flags triggered." Theodore Blackstone looked like he might be sick. His clients hadn't just committed financial crimes, they documented everything in writing. But I wasn't finished. "Agent Rodriguez, you'll also find communications discussing the creation of shell companies, the movement of funds through cryptocurrency exchanges, and specific instructions for avoiding banking regulations." I pulled out another stack of printouts. These messages show detailed planning for tax evasion, including discussions of which expenses to fabricate and how to create fake invoices that would pass IRS audits. Diana's team was frantically taking notes and photographing everything. This wasn't just evidence of crimes, it was a complete blueprint of how the conspiracy operated. Marcus stepped forward with his own contribution. "Agent Rodriguez, we also recovered deleted emails from Ashford Development Group's server. The IT department thought they were permanently erased, but forensic recovery revealed some interesting communications." He handed over a flash drive. These emails discuss payments to county officials, agreements to inflate government contract costs, and specific instructions for laundering the excess payments. Judge Ashford finally found his voice. Those communications are privileged. You can't use private correspondence. Actually, Judge, Diana replied, communications discussing ongoing criminal activity aren't protected by any privilege. These messages constitute evidence of conspiracy, money laundering, and government corruption. That's when Veronica made her second catastrophic mistake of the day. "This is all Damien's fault," she screamed, jumping up from her chair. "He forced me to buy those properties. He threatened me if I didn't help him hide his money." Theodore Blackstone lunged toward her. "Stop talking! Don't say another word!" But Veronica was past caring about legal strategy. The pressure had finally broken her, and 3 months of fear and guilt came pouring out. "I never wanted to be involved in any of this. Damien said it was just creative accounting, that everyone did it. Then his father got involved and started talking about government contracts and political favors, and I was in too deep to get out." "Veronica, shut up!" Damien shouted, but the damage was done. She'd just confessed to money laundering, tax evasion, and government corruption while being recorded by federal agents. Diana looked at her team and nodded slightly. This was the moment they'd been waiting for, a cooperative witness willing to detail the entire conspiracy. "Ms. Delacroix," Diana said gently, "would you be willing to provide a full statement about your involvement in these activities?" "Yes," Veronica sobbed. "I'll tell you everything. I just want this to be over." Theodore Blackstone looked like he wanted to throw himself out the window. In less than 5 minutes, his client had voluntarily confessed to multiple federal crimes while waiving her right to remain silent. But I had one more surprise waiting. "Agent Rodriguez," I said, walking over to our wall safe, "there's something else you should see." I opened the safe and removed a small recording device, the kind used for dictation and interviews. For the past 6 weeks, I've been recording conversations in this house. With Damien's knowledge and consent, of course, since we're married and it's our shared residence. Damien's face went white. "Claire, what did you do?" "I documented everything," I replied, handing the device to Diana. "Every conversation about fake invoices, every discussion of shell companies, every phone call about government contracts. 6 weeks of detailed admissions of criminal activity. I'd been wearing a wire in my own home, turning every breakfast conversation and evening discussion into evidence for federal prosecutors." Diana plugged the device into a laptop and began scrolling through dozens of audio files, each one labeled with dates and participants. "This is remarkable," she said, looking up at me with something approaching admiration. "You've essentially documented a complete criminal conspiracy in real time." Judge Ashford slumped in his chair, finally understanding that his decades of political maneuvering couldn't save him from federal prosecutors armed with recorded confessions and detailed financial evidence. "The recording from March 18th should be particularly interesting," I added. That's when Judge Ashford explained to Damien how to structure government contract kickbacks to avoid detection. As Diana's team began processing the mountain of evidence I'd provided, I realized that Veronica's Instagram photos had been just the beginning. Her attempt to destroy me with proof of the affair had triggered an investigation that revealed crimes far beyond anything she'd imagined. The trap was complete, and they'd walked into it willingly. The formal interviews began in our living room, which had been transformed into an impromptu federal interrogation facility. Agent Rodriguez's team had set up recording equipment, document stations, and separate interview areas to prevent the suspects from coordinating their stories. What happened next was a masterclass in federal law enforcement tactics and the spectacular implosion of a criminal conspiracy. Diana started with Veronica, who was still sobbing and eager to confess everything in exchange for leniency. Theodore Blackstone sat beside his client looking like a man watching his legal career circle the drain, occasionally attempting to interject legal objections that Diana politely ignored. "Ms. Delacroix," Diana began, her voice professionally neutral, "you stated that you were coerced into participating in money laundering activities. Can you walk us through how that began?" Veronica wiped her eyes with tissues that were rapidly becoming sodden. "It started about 8 months ago when Damien and when we began our relationship. He said his business was struggling with cash flow because clients paid in cash, but banks were suspicious of large deposits. So he asked you to help legitimize cash payments through real estate purchases." "Yes. He said it was just temporary, until he could restructure his business operations. I thought I was helping him avoid unnecessary banking complications." Blackstone finally managed to insert himself into the conversation. "Agent Rodriguez, my client was clearly manipulated by Mr. Ashford. She had no knowledge of the illegal nature." "Actually," Diana interrupted, pulling out one of the text message printouts, "Ms. Delacroix sent this message to Mr. Ashford on February 12th. IRS audit risks getting higher with these transaction volumes. Maybe we should slow down until tax season passes. That suggests awareness of tax implications." Veronica's face crumpled. "Damien told me the IRS was just being overly cautious. I didn't realize we were actually breaking laws." "What about this message from March 3rd where you wrote, 'Dad says county contracts are golden because government auditors never cross-reference with state tax records'? Who is Dad in this context?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Everyone in the room knew the answer, but saying it out loud would implicate Judge Ashford directly in the conspiracy. Veronica glanced desperately at the judge, who was sitting across the room being interviewed by FBI agent Thompson. The judge caught her look and shook his head almost imperceptibly. I don't remember sending that message." Diana smiled coldly. "Ms. Delacroix, we have the original phone records from your carrier. The messages are time-stamped and geolocation tagged. This particular message was sent from Judge Ashford's home address at 8:47 p.m. on March 3rd. The implication was devastating. Veronica hadn't just received advice about evading government auditors. She'd received it while physically present at the judge's house, during what was clearly a planning meeting for their criminal activities. Meanwhile, across the room, Judge Ashford was facing his own interrogation nightmare. FBI agent Thompson was a veteran of political corruption cases, and he'd clearly done his homework on the judge's background. "Judge Ashford," Agent Thompson said, "county records show you personally recommended Pinnacle Construction for 7 different contracts over the past 2 years. Can you explain the basis for these recommendations?" The judge straightened in his chair, trying to project his old courtroom authority. "Pinnacle Construction has an excellent reputation and competitive pricing. All contract awards were made through proper legal procedures." "I'm sure they were. It's interesting, though, that Pinnacle Construction didn't exist as a legal entity until 6 months before receiving their first county contract. Their business license application lists Damien Ashford as a consulting partner." Judge Ashford's composure flickered. "Many construction companies use consultants. That's not unusual." "You're absolutely right. What is unusual is that Pinnacle Construction consistently submitted bids that were 200 to 300% higher than their competitors, yet still received contract awards. Can you explain how that happened?" Agent Thompson pulled out a thick folder. "We've reviewed all 7 contracts. In each case, Pinnacle Construction's bid was the highest submitted, but they were awarded the contracts anyway. The justification documents cite, quote, 'superior qualifications and judge recommendations.' I evaluated their qualifications based on what, exactly?" Pinnacle Construction had no prior government contract experience, no significant construction projects in their portfolio, and no verifiable client references. Their, quote, "superior qualifications appear to consist entirely of being connected to your son." The judge's legendary composure was cracking under professional interrogation. 40 years of political maneuvering hadn't prepared him for FBI agents armed with forensic evidence and recorded confessions. But the real bombshell came when Agent Rodriguez played one of my recorded conversations from 3 weeks earlier. The recording crackled to life, filling the room with voices that everyone recognized. "Harrison, the Riverside contract came through perfectly," Damien's voice said clearly. "Pinnacle got the full $280,000, and after legitimate expenses, we cleared $190,000 in consultation fees." "Excellent," Judge Ashford's voice replied. "The development board never questions my contractor recommendations. As long as we keep the overages under 300%, no one looks twice at the numbers." "What about the IRS?" "Claire's been asking questions about some of our banking patterns." "Claire's a smart accountant, but she doesn't understand government contract procedures. Just make sure your consultation payments look legitimate on paper." The recording continued for another 2 minutes, with Judge Ashford providing detailed advice on how to structure fraudulent government contracts to avoid detection. When the recording ended, the silence in the room was absolute. Theodore Blackstone looked like he wanted to disappear into the furniture. His clients hadn't just committed crimes, they'd recorded themselves discussing the specific details of their criminal conspiracy. Agent Thompson leaned forward. "Judge Ashford, would you like to revise your previous statement about the nature of your relationship with Pinnacle Construction?" The judge's hands were shaking now. I want to speak with my attorney." "Of course. But I should mention that we have 14 more recordings of similar conversations, covering the entire scope of your involvement in fraudulent government contracts." That's when Damien made his own catastrophic decision. "This is insane," he shouted, jumping up from his chair so violently that his FBI interviewer reached for his weapon. "Claire, you recorded our private conversations? You turned our home into some kind of FBI sting operation?" He whirled around to face me, his face red with rage and desperation. "You want to destroy me over an affair? Fine. But dragging my father into this, recording our family conversations, turning everything we said into evidence, what kind of psychopath does that?" Diana Rodriguez looked at him with the calm expression of someone who'd seen countless criminals lose their composure during interrogations. "Mr. Ashford," she said quietly, "your wife didn't create the criminal conspiracy. She simply documented it. The illegal activities, the fraudulent contracts, the money laundering, those were your choices. She betrayed her own family." "Actually," I said, standing up for the first time since the interviews began, "I protected my family. Our daughter deserves a father who isn't a federal criminal, and she deserves to inherit something other than debt and scandal." I walked over to where Damien stood, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. "You made the choice to commit crimes. You made the choice to involve your father in government corruption. You made the choice to document everything in text messages and recorded conversations." I paused, letting the weight of his situation sink in. "And you made the choice to try destroying me with Instagram photos instead of simply ending our marriage honestly." The room fell silent as the full scope of their situation became clear. They'd created a criminal conspiracy, documented their own crimes, and then triggered a federal investigation by trying to humiliate the one person who had evidence to destroy them all. Agent Rodriguez looked around the room at the 3 suspects, all of whom had now provided incriminating statements while being recorded by federal agents. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "you're all under arrest." The arrests unfolded with the choreographed precision of agents who'd done this hundreds of times before. Agent Rodriguez read each suspect their Miranda rights, while her team documented everything with body cameras and digital recording equipment that would ensure no procedural errors could invalidate their confessions later. Damien was cuffed first, his hands shaking as the metal restraints clicked into place. The man who'd strutted through our house just hours earlier, confident in his father's political protection, now looked like a frightened child facing consequences for the first time in his privileged life. Damien Ashford, Agent Rodriguez, stated clearly for the recording, "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering, tax evasion, bank fraud, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government." Veronica's arrest was almost anticlimactic. She'd been sobbing continuously for the past hour, and when Agent Thompson approached with handcuffs, she simply held out her wrists in resignation. "Veronica Delacroix, you're under arrest for money laundering, conspiracy to commit tax evasion, real estate fraud, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government." But Judge Ashford's arrest was the moment that truly demonstrated how completely their world had collapsed. The retired judge who'd spent 40 years commanding respect in courtrooms throughout the state was now being read his rights by federal agents young enough to be his grandchildren. His silver hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his legendary composure had evaporated entirely. "Harrison Ashford," Agent Rodriguez announced, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to defraud the United States government, bribery, corruption of public officials, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and conspiracy to commit tax evasion." The judge's knees buckled slightly. The political empire he'd built over decades was crumbling in real time, and everyone in the room knew that federal corruption charges against a sitting or retired judge carried sentences that would effectively end his life behind bars. Theodore Blackstone was frantically taking notes, trying to salvage something from the legal catastrophe unfolding before him. "Agent Rodriguez, I demand immediate access to my clients for private consultation. These arrests are premature." "Mr. Blackstone," Diana interrupted, "your clients confessed to multiple federal crimes while being recorded. They provided detailed admissions of criminal activity spanning 3 years. The arrests are not only appropriate, they're mandatory under federal law." She gestured to her team, who began the process of transporting the suspects to federal detention facilities for booking and arraignment. "Your clients will be processed at the federal courthouse downtown. Arraignment hearings will be scheduled within 24 hours, as required by law." As the suspects were led away, Marcus and I stood in our ravaged living room, surrounded by evidence boxes, recording equipment, and the debris of a criminal investigation that had consumed our home for the past 4 hours. "Claire," Marcus said quietly, "you realize there's no going back from this. Once federal prosecutors file charges, this becomes a matter of public record. The media attention alone will be intense." I nodded, watching through our front window as my husband of 7 years was placed in the back of a federal transport vehicle. "I know, but some things are more important than privacy." Agent Rodriguez approached with a thick manila folder. "Ms. Whitmore, we'll need you to review and sign your formal statement. You'll also need to prepare for testimony before a federal grand jury, likely within the next 2 weeks." She handed me the folder. "I have to ask, how long have you been planning this? The evidence collection, the recordings, the coordination with multiple agencies? This level of preparation doesn't happen overnight." I sat down at our dining room table, which was still covered with financial documents and evidence bags. "Agent Rodriguez, I've been a forensic accountant for 15 years. When I see financial crimes, I document them. It's what I do professionally. But you didn't report the suspicious activity immediately when you first discovered it. You spent months building a comprehensive case instead." She was right, of course. I'd been strategically patient, allowing Damien and his conspirators to continue their crimes while I gathered evidence that would ensure their complete destruction. "I needed to be certain," I said finally. "Accusations of tax evasion and money laundering require overwhelming proof. I wanted to make sure that when I reported their activities, the evidence would be ironclad." Agent Rodriguez smiled knowingly. "Ms. Whitmore, in my experience, most people who discover their spouses are committing financial crimes either report it immediately or ignore it completely. Very few people have the discipline to conduct a months-long undercover investigation in their own homes." She was probing, trying to understand my motivations. Federal agents were trained to identify revenge plots that might compromise their cases. and Diana needed to ensure that my evidence would survive scrutiny in federal court. "Agent Rodriguez," I replied, "my husband committed federal crimes. My role as a forensic accountant required me to report those crimes once I had sufficient evidence to support prosecution." The timing of my discovery of his personal infidelity was irrelevant to my professional obligations. It was a carefully crafted answer that positioned my actions as professional duty rather than personal revenge. Both Marcus and Diana understood the legal significance of that framing. "Understood," Diana said. "We'll need you to maintain that distinction throughout the prosecution process. Personal motivations can complicate federal cases, but professional obligations to report financial crimes are protected under federal whistleblower statutes." Over the next several hours, we worked through the formal evidence transfer process. Every document, every recording, every piece of financial data had to be cataloged, authenticated, and prepared for federal court proceedings. The scope of evidence was staggering. Marcus had prepared a summary document that read like a prosecutor's fantasy. $5.2 million in unreported income, 17 fraudulent property transactions, 8 offshore accounts, 12 shell companies, and 14 recorded conversations documenting the criminal conspiracy. "The federal sentencing guidelines for these charges are severe," Diana explained as we worked through the evidence inventory. "Money laundering carries sentences of up to 20 years. Government corruption charges can result in life imprisonment. Tax evasion of this magnitude typically results in 10 to 15 years, plus massive financial penalties." She paused, looking at the mountain of evidence we'd assembled. "Combined with the conspiracy charges and the amounts involved, your husband and his co-conspirators are likely facing sentences of 25 to 30 years each. Minimum." The reality of those numbers hit me with unexpected force. Despite everything Damien had done, despite his betrayal and crimes, he was still the father of my daughter. Those sentences would effectively end his life as a free man. "What about plea bargains?" I asked. With this level of evidence and the amounts involved, the U.S. Attorney's Office typically offers minimal plea reductions. Maybe 20 years instead of 30, depending on cooperation level. Marcus looked up from the documents he was organizing. "Claire, you need to understand that federal prosecutors don't negotiate on cases this strong. When defendants hand them recorded confessions and complete financial documentation, there's no incentive to offer significant plea deals." By evening, our house had returned to relative quiet. The federal agents had departed with their evidence, leaving behind only receipts and case numbers that would track the materials through the prosecution process. I stood in our kitchen, looking at the chairs where Damien, Veronica, and Judge Ashford had sat just hours earlier, confident in their ability to intimidate me into silence. Now they were in federal detention cells, facing the destruction of everything they'd built through criminal activity. My phone buzzed with a text message from my attorney, confirming that divorce proceedings would be expedited given Damien's federal indictment. Asset forfeiture laws meant most of our shared property would be seized as proceeds of criminal activity, but I would be protected as an innocent spouse who had actively assisted law enforcement. The house felt different now, quieter, cleaner, as if the removal of the criminals had purified the air itself. Tomorrow would bring media attention, court appearances, and the beginning of federal prosecutions that would dominate headlines for months. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt completely safe in my own home. Justice wasn't just coming, it had arrived. 24 hours after the arrests, the media circus began in earnest. By 6 a.m., news vans were parked along our tree-lined street in Millbrook Heights, their satellite dishes creating a technological forest that transformed our quiet neighborhood into a broadcast zone. The story had everything reporters loved: political corruption, family betrayal, Instagram evidence, and a forensic accountant who'd turned her own home into an FBI sting operation. The headlines were sensational and unforgiving. Judge's son arrested in $5 million tax fraud scheme. Instagram affair photos expose money laundering ring. Forensic accountant wife takes down husband's criminal empire. I watched the news coverage from my home office, sipping coffee while reporters stood on my lawn discussing the shocking betrayal and unprecedented investigation that had destroyed one of the state's most politically connected families. But the media attention was just the beginning of the secondary victories that would unfold over the following weeks. The first domino fell when the state attorney general announced a comprehensive investigation into all government contracts awarded during Judge Ashford's tenure on the County Development Board. Every construction project, every vendor selection, every no-bid contract from the past 5 years would be scrutinized by forensic auditors and federal investigators. Within days, 3 additional construction companies were identified as potential co-conspirators in the bid rigging scheme. Pinnacle Construction, it turned out, was just the tip of an iceberg that included systematic corruption worth over $12 million in fraudulent government contracts. The second domino was even more satisfying. Veronica's real estate license was immediately suspended pending investigation. But that was only the beginning of her professional destruction. The State Real Estate Commission discovered that she'd been operating without proper insurance, using client escrow accounts to facilitate money laundering, and lying on her annual licensing renewals about her financial activities. More importantly, her cooperation with federal prosecutors led to the discovery of additional victims. Veronica had been running a separate scam, convincing elderly clients to invest in, quote, guaranteed return real estate partnerships that were actually Ponzi schemes funded by her money laundering profits. Ms. Whitmore, Agent Rodriguez, called to inform me, we've identified 17 additional victims of Ms. Delacroix's real estate fraud. Mostly retirees who invested their life savings in her fake investment partnerships. The total amount stolen approaches $800,000. That meant additional federal charges for elder abuse, securities fraud, and operating an unlicensed investment scheme. Veronica's potential sentence jumped from 20 years to 35 years, with restitution requirements that would ensure she'd never see financial freedom again. But the most devastating secondary consequences targeted Judge Ashford's political legacy. The governor announced a special commission to review every case the judge had presided over during his 40-year career. Defense attorneys across the state began filing appeals, claiming their clients had been convicted by a corrupt judge whose integrity was now in question. The State Bar Association opened formal proceedings to posthumously strip Judge Ashford of his law license and remove his name from the courthouse where he'd served for decades. The scholarship fund he'd established at the state university was dissolved, and his portrait was quietly removed from the Judicial Hall of Fame. Most damaging of all, the IRS announced that Judge Ashford's personal tax returns would be audited for the past 10 years. Federal investigators had found evidence that he'd received unreported payments not just from the construction scheme, but from multiple sources throughout his judicial career. Judge Ashford appears to have been selling favorable judicial decisions for decades, Marcus told me during one of our daily case updates. The construction contracts were just his retirement scheme. His actual corruption goes back to the 1990s. The revelation that a sitting judge had been taking bribes for judicial decisions sent shockwaves through the state's legal system. Every attorney who'd practiced before Judge Ashford was now questioning whether their victories or defeats had been influenced by corruption rather than legal merit. Meanwhile, Damien's construction company was facing its own cascading disasters. The State Labor Board discovered that Ashford Development Group had been systematically underpaying workers, avoiding payroll taxes, and operating without proper safety certifications. OSHA investigators found dozens of safety violations at active construction sites, leading to immediate work stoppages and massive fines. More critically, every client who'd paid Damien's company in cash was now being investigated by the IRS for potential tax evasion. Federal prosecutors had shared client lists with tax authorities, triggering audits that would likely reveal widespread tax avoidance throughout the construction industry. Your husband's client base was essentially a who's who of local tax evaders, Agent Rodriguez explained during one of our follow-up meetings. Every cash payment he received was from someone trying to avoid reporting their own income. The investigation has expanded to include 47 additional individuals and businesses. The ripple effects were destroying not just Damien's criminal enterprise, but an entire network of connected tax evaders who'd thought cash payments would keep them invisible to federal authorities. But perhaps the most satisfying secondary victory came from an unexpected source: social media. Veronica's Instagram account, which had started this entire investigation, became a treasure trove for federal prosecutors and social media investigators. Her addiction to documenting her lifestyle had created a digital trail that revealed connections to dozens of other potential crimes. Photos from luxury vacations showed her with known money launderers from other states. Restaurant check-ins corresponded exactly with dates of suspicious financial transactions. Even her shopping posts provided evidence of purchases made with laundered money. She documented everything, Diana Rodriguez told me with something approaching admiration. 3 years of criminal activity, all posted publicly with timestamps and location data. Federal prosecutors are calling it the most complete social media evidence collection they've ever seen. The IRS had created a dedicated team just to analyze Veronica's Instagram posts and cross-reference them with financial records. Every photo became potential evidence, every caption a possible admission of criminal activity. Social media investigators discovered that Veronica had inspired copycat schemes in other cities. Young real estate agents across the country had been following her Instagram account and attempting to replicate her success through similar money laundering operations. The federal investigation expanded into a multi-state task force targeting real estate money laundering schemes that had been inspired by Veronica's social media presence. She'd inadvertently become the poster child for a nationwide crackdown on construction industry tax evasion. By the end of the 3rd week, the investigation had grown far beyond my husband's local criminal enterprise. Federal prosecutors were building RICO cases against organized crime networks in 5 states, all connected through the evidence I'd provided from our kitchen table in Millbrook Heights. The woman who'd posted Instagram photos thinking she'd destroy me with proof of an affair had instead provided federal authorities with evidence that would take down criminal enterprises across the country. As I watched the evening news coverage of the latest arrests, I realized that my methodical documentation of Damien's crimes had triggered the largest financial crime investigation in the state's history. Justice wasn't just personal anymore, it had become a movement. 6 months after the arrests, the federal courthouse had become as familiar to me as my own office. I testified before 3 separate grand juries, participated in countless depositions, and provided expert witness testimony that helped prosecutors understand the intricate financial mechanisms Damien and his conspirators had used to hide their crimes. The trials themselves were legal spectacles that dominated local and national news for weeks. Federal prosecutors had built cases so comprehensive that defense attorneys were reduced to arguing for mercy rather than innocence. The evidence I'd methodically collected, combined with the defendant's own recorded confessions, created an overwhelming narrative of guilt that no jury could ignore. Damien was sentenced first, on a cold Thursday morning in November. Judge Patricia Morrison, a no-nonsense federal jurist with 30 years of experience, delivered the verdict with clinical precision. "Mr. Ashford," she announced from the bench, "you have been found guilty of conspiracy to commit money laundering, tax evasion totaling $2.8 million, bank fraud, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government. The court sentences you to 28 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release, and restitution of $4.2 million to the federal government." 28 years. Damien would be 73 years old when he was eligible for release. His face crumpled as the reality of his sentence sank in, and I watched from the gallery as federal marshals prepared to transport him to the federal penitentiary, where he'd spend the rest of his productive life. Judge Ashford's sentencing was even more devastating. At 73, a 32-year sentence for government corruption, bribery, and conspiracy effectively meant he would die in federal prison. The judge, who'd spent 40 years dispensing justice, was now receiving it with the full weight of federal law. But Veronica's sentencing provided the most dramatic conclusion to the entire saga. Additional investigations had revealed that her criminal activities extended far beyond the money laundering scheme with Damien. Federal prosecutors had uncovered evidence of securities fraud, elder abuse, identity theft, and operation of an unlicensed investment scheme that had defrauded dozens of victims. The final tally was staggering: 37 federal felony convictions, $3.8 million in restitution owed to victims, and a sentence of 42 years in federal prison. Ms. Delacroix, Judge Morrison said during the sentencing hearing, "Your crimes represent a betrayal of trust that extended far beyond tax evasion. You systematically targeted elderly victims, exploited their life savings, and used social media to inspire copycat crimes in other jurisdictions. The court finds no mitigating factors that would justify leniency." Veronica collapsed during the sentencing, requiring medical attention before she could be transported to federal custody. The Instagram influencer who'd thought she could destroy me with affair photos was now facing 4 decades in federal prison. But the most significant transformation wasn't in the courtroom, it was in my own life. Whitmore and Associates had evolved from a respected local accounting firm into a nationally recognized forensic investigation company. The publicity from the case had attracted clients from across the country who needed help uncovering financial crimes. And our expertise in combining traditional accounting methods with digital evidence collection made us uniquely valuable to law enforcement agencies. Marcus and I had hired 6 additional forensic accountants and established partnerships with federal agencies that regularly called on our expertise for complex financial crime investigations. Our client base now included Fortune 500 companies, federal prosecutors, and international law enforcement agencies investigating cross-border financial crimes. "Claire," Marcus said during one of our weekly partner meetings, "we've been asked to consult on a money laundering investigation in 3 countries. The State Department wants our help tracking cryptocurrency transfers through offshore banking systems." The professional recognition was gratifying, but the personal transformation was even more profound. My daughter Emma, I'd legally changed her name from Angela to protect her privacy, was thriving in ways I hadn't thought possible during the chaos of her father's criminal activities. At 8 years old, she was too young to fully understand the legal proceedings, but she clearly understood that our life had become more stable, more peaceful, and more secure. "Mommy," she said one evening as I tucked her into bed in our new house, "I like it better when Daddy doesn't live here. It's quieter now." Children have an instinctive understanding of emotional safety that adults often miss. Emma had sensed the tension and danger of living with criminals long before I'd consciously acknowledged it myself. Our new home was everything our old house had never been: clean, peaceful, and free from the constant undercurrent of fear that had defined our previous life. I had purchased it with the advance from my book deal. Yes, publishers had been very interested in my story, and designed it specifically as a sanctuary for Emma and me. The book itself, The Accountant's Evidence: How I Brought Down a Criminal Empire from My Kitchen Table, had become a bestseller in the true crime genre. The combination of financial crime, family betrayal, and social media evidence had captured public imagination in ways that surprised even my publisher. More importantly, the book had established me as a leading expert on financial crime investigation, leading to speaking engagements at law enforcement conferences, university criminology programs, and professional accounting associations. Ms. Whitmore, the conference coordinator from the FBI Academy, had said when booking my latest speaking engagement, Agents consistently rate your presentations as the most practical and applicable training they receive on financial crime investigation. Your methods are being taught at federal law enforcement academies nationwide. The speaking fees alone would have been sufficient to support Emma and me comfortably, but they were just one revenue stream in what had become a diversified career built on my expertise in forensic accounting and criminal investigation. But perhaps the most satisfying transformation was in my relationship with Emma. Without Damien's criminal activities creating constant stress and uncertainty, I had been able to focus completely on being the mother Emma deserved. We took vacations to places I'd dreamed of visiting, explored museums and cultural sites that fed her curiosity, and built traditions that were entirely our own. "Mommy," she said during one of our weekend museum visits, "when I grow up, I want to help catch bad people like you do." The pride I felt in that moment was overwhelming. My daughter saw me not as a victim of betrayal, but as someone who fought injustice and won. That was the legacy I wanted to leave her. Not the trauma of her father's crimes, but the strength of standing up for what's right regardless of personal cost. The asset forfeiture proceedings had concluded in my favor, with federal courts ruling that I'd been an innocent spouse who had actively assisted law enforcement in uncovering the criminal activities. Most of Damien's ill-gotten gains were seized by the federal government, but I retained ownership of assets that could be proven to have come from legitimate sources. More importantly, the divorce settlement had been structured to protect Emma's future. A trust fund established with royalties from my book and speaking engagements would ensure her college education and provide financial security, regardless of what happened to her father's criminal restitution obligations. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the forensic psychologist who'd been working with Emma throughout the legal proceedings, had provided regular updates on our daughter's emotional adjustment. "Emma shows no signs of trauma related to her father's absence," Dr. Mitchell reported during our final session. "In fact, her anxiety levels have decreased significantly since the household stress was eliminated. She's a remarkably resilient child who's thriving in your stable, nurturing environment." On quiet evenings after Emma was asleep and the house was peaceful, I sometimes reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. Veronica's Instagram photos, intended to destroy me with proof of infidelity, had instead provided the evidence that exposed a criminal enterprise and transformed my life completely. The woman who'd thought she could break me with social media posts was now serving a 42-year federal sentence, while I'd built a successful career helping law enforcement agencies catch financial criminals. The husband who'd betrayed me with affairs and crimes was spending the rest of his life in federal prison, while Emma and I were living in safety, prosperity, and peace. Justice hadn't just been served, it had become the foundation for a completely transformed life that was better than anything I could have imagined during those dark months of discovering Damien's criminal activities. The victim had become the victor, and the victory was absolute. 2 years after that fateful 3:47 a.m. Instagram notification, I stood on the stage of the National Association of Forensic Accountants annual conference, looking out at an audience of 500 professionals who'd come to hear about the case that had fundamentally changed how law enforcement agencies investigate financial crimes. The irony wasn't lost on me. Veronica Delacroix had posted those intimate photos expecting to find me sobbing and broken, begging Damien to choose me over her. Instead, she'd triggered a chain of events that made me one of the most sought-after speakers in the criminal justice field. "The most important lesson I learned," I told the audience, "is that criminals always document their own crimes. They can't help themselves. Whether it's text messages, social media posts, or recorded conversations, people who break the law compulsively create evidence of their activities." In the 2 years since the federal trials concluded, I'd consulted on over 40 financial crime investigations across 12 states. The methods I'd developed while investigating Damien's criminal enterprise had become standard training at the FBI Academy, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, and law enforcement agencies throughout North America. But the professional recognition, satisfying as it was, paled in comparison to the personal peace I'd found. Emma, now 10 years old, had grown into a confident, curious child who showed no signs of trauma from her father's criminal activities or incarceration. She attended one of the best private schools in the state, funded by the steady royalties from my book and the consulting fees that had exceeded my wildest financial expectations. "Mommy," she'd said just last week, "my teacher wants to know if you can come speak to our class about your job catching bad guys." The pride in her voice when she talked about my work was worth more than any professional accolade I had received. Emma saw me as someone who fought for justice and won, not as a victim who'd been rescued by circumstances. Our life had settled into rhythms that would have been impossible during the chaos of Damien's criminal years. Weekend trips to museums and historical sites fed Emma's growing love of learning. Evening walks through our neighborhood provided the peaceful connection that had been impossible when we lived in constant fear of discovery. The house itself had become a symbol of our transformation. Where our previous home had been tainted by criminal activity and hidden surveillance equipment, our new residence was designed around openness, light, and safety. Emma's friends were welcome anytime, and their laughter filled spaces that had once echoed with whispered conversations about money laundering and tax evasion. Last month, I'd received an unexpected phone call that provided the final piece of closure I hadn't realized I needed. "Ms. Whitmore," the voice said, "this is Warden Patricia Collins from Federal Correctional Institution Ashland. I'm calling about your former husband, Damien Ashford." My heart stopped. For a moment, I wondered if Damien had died in prison, or if there had been some legal development that might affect Emma's trust fund or my own legal protections. "What about him?" I asked carefully. "Mr. Ashford has requested permission to write you a letter. Prison regulations require your consent before we can facilitate communication between inmates and victims of their crimes." The request surprised me. In 2 years, Damien had made no attempt to contact Emma or me. I'd assumed he understood that any communication would be unwelcome and potentially problematic for his appeals process. "What kind of letter?" "He indicates it's a personal apology, not related to his legal case. Our counselors believe it may be part of his genuine effort to accept responsibility for his actions." I considered the request for several days before agreeing. Curiosity, more than any desire for reconciliation, drove my decision. The letter arrived 2 weeks later, written in Damien's familiar handwriting on plain prison stationery. "Claire, I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. I know that what I did destroyed our family and hurt Emma in ways I'm still learning to understand. I've had 2 years to think about how we got here, and I keep coming back to that night when Veronica posted those photos. She expected you to cry and fall apart. I expected you to come begging me to choose you over her. We both underestimated you completely. The truth is, I never really saw you during our marriage. I saw someone who balanced the books and asked few questions, not the brilliant forensic accountant who was capable of bringing down criminal enterprises from her kitchen table. I spent 7 years married to one of the most intelligent, capable women I'd ever met, and I was too selfish and stupid to appreciate what I had. You turned the worst betrayal of your life into evidence that protected Emma's future and built a career that helps other victims find justice. That takes a strength I never possessed and a moral clarity I never developed. Emma will grow up knowing her mother is someone who fights for what's right, regardless of personal cost. That's a better legacy than anything I could have given her. I'm genuinely proud of what you've accomplished, even though I have no right to feel pride about any part of your life anymore. Thank you for protecting our daughter from the consequences of my criminal activities. Thank you for giving her a stable, honest life that I never could have provided. I hope someday she'll understand that her father's crimes don't define her, and that her mother's courage does. Damien. I read the letter 3 times, sitting in my home office surrounded by case files from current investigations. The man who'd written those words bore little resemblance to the arrogant criminal who'd dismissed my questions about his finances while carrying on affairs and laundering money. Prison had either genuinely changed him or taught him to express remorse more convincingly. Either way, his acknowledgement of my strength and Emma's bright future provided a kind of closure I hadn't expected to find. That evening, I tucked the letter into my safe alongside the original evidence files from the investigation, not because I treasured it, but because it represented the final chapter of a story that had transformed my life completely. Emma was in her room doing homework, occasionally calling out questions about math problems that I answered while reviewing financial statements for a new money laundering case involving cryptocurrency and real estate, remarkably similar to the scheme that had started my journey into forensic investigation. The doorbell rang just as I was finishing my case notes. Through the peephole, I saw Marcus standing on my front porch with a bottle of champagne and a broad smile. "What are we celebrating?" I asked, opening the door. "The Justice Department just announced that our investigation methods are being implemented as standard protocol for financial crimes units nationwide," he said, holding up the champagne. "They're calling it the Whitmore Protocol." The Whitmore Protocol. My name would be permanently associated with the investigative techniques that had grown from my desperate need to document Damien's crimes. As Marcus opened the champagne and Emma emerged from her room to investigate the celebration, I realized that Veronica's Instagram attack had given me something she never intended: the motivation to discover my own strength. The woman who'd tried to destroy me with proof of my husband's infidelity had instead provided the catalyst for a complete life transformation that exceeded anything I could have imagined during my quietest dreams. Her 42-year prison sentence was justice, but my thriving career, Emma's bright future, and the peaceful life we'd built together, that was victory. Looking back, I could honestly say I was grateful for that 3:47 a.m. notification. Without it, I might have remained the quiet accountant wife who balanced the books and asked no questions. Instead, I'd become someone who fought injustice and won. The victim had not just survived, she'd transcended every limitation that had once defined her. And that transformation would last long after the criminals were forgotten in their federal prison cells. The best revenge, I'd learned, wasn't destruction. It was becoming everything your enemies never believed you could be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.